Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
China is to grant zero-tariff treatment to all African countries with diplomatic ties. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi meets his Australian counterpart Penny Wong in Beijing, calls for jointly upholding multilateralism. And Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Donald Trump have held a phone conversation, discuss Ukraine, Iran, and bilateral ties. Welcome to World Today, a news program with a different perspective. I'm Ge Anna in Beijing. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. Let's start with global trade. China says its zero-tariff policy for 53 African diplomatic partners demonstrates a shared commitment to global peace and development with stability. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian says China will steadily enhance trade with Africa.
Amid rising global protectionism and unilateralism, and as the spillover effects of the situation in the Middle East reach neighbouring continents, China is sharing opportunities and pursuing common development with Africa through zero-tariff treatment. This demonstrates the determination of China and Africa to contribute to global peace and development with stability.
Starting Friday, China became the first major economy to offer such a policy to African countries. So to delve into this, joining us on the line is Dr. Yao Shujie, Chong Kong Professor of Economics at Chongqing University. Professor, we know 33 least developed African countries have already been enjoying full zero-tariff treatment since late 2024. Now, starting May 1st, China has extended this policy to 20 more African partners that are not classified as least developed countries, bringing the total to all 53 African countries with diplomatic ties to China. So compared with the original 33 countries, what are the key differences? How does the policy work for these new countries compared to earlier group?
Well, it is extended to another 20 countries which are much more well advanced and also they have a bigger population. So the coverage of the whole African continent is nearly 1 billion people, which is a very large, sizable population on Earth. So this kind of connection between Africa and China will give a lot of scope for mutual development, especially China is now the largest trading nation in the world. China import a lot of product, particularly the product they produce in Africa. So this would have a historic significance in terms of boosting the bilateral trade, investment, and also people's exchange. It not only changed the economy, geography, but also changed the political and international development, relationship between the largest developing nations in the numerous number, which is 53 country of the least developed country in the world, especially in Africa, which have been, underlooked by many developed countries in the world. And this is a great opportunity for Africa. Like the chairman of the African Trade Union say, this is the brotherhood relationship. It actually have a very high, praise on China's effort to help Africa economy for sustainable economic development and improve the livelihood of the African people, which, as I say, is a very big number, nearly 1 billion people on the continent nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Professor, looking at specific products, previously tariffs on cocoa from Ghana, for example, ranged from 8% to 22%. Kenya coffee faced tariffs of 8% to 30%, avocados 20%, South African citrus 12%, and wine is from 14% to 20%. Then from May 1st, all these products will gradually enjoy zero tariffs. So which African exports do you think will take off first, and which ones could actually become more popular with Chinese consumers?
Yes, I look at the bilateral trade between China and Africa. What China import is the minerals and also the oil as well as agricultural produce. Now, you mentioned the set of numbers, like the import duty from Africa to China is about 8 to 30% for different products, different countries. And now this immediately is reduced to zero. It will have a remarkable impact on the cost of import into China that would boost the incentive of production in Africa. And the major agricultural produce such as sesame, vegetables, fruit. These are the major African products. And China probably have the intention to help the African countries to make the raw agricultural produce into processed agricultural product, so there will be more value added to the African continent countries before they export it to China. Of course, it requires a lot of investment, technology, and also the hygiene of agricultural processing industries before they meet the quarantine, requirement to the domestic market in China. Mm-hmm. Now, countries such as Ethiopia, Algeria, and also Zimbabwe, they have a big population, and also the people there depend heavily on the raw materials and agricultural produce. So China, by opening the gate so wide for zero tariff, it would be a great opportunity to boost the likelihood of the peasantry in the country that I just mentioned, and probably immediately across the whole continent of 53 countries from next month. So it is a very, very important boost to the African economy for the future to come.
Mm-hmm. Professor, speaking of a faster customs clearance, there's also this upgraded grain channel for African agricultural exports. So in practical terms, what does that actually change for producers and exporters?
Yeah, the grain channel, it means that China would have a very direct channel of export from Africa. So there's lots of, not only just the tariff is reduced to zero, but the non-trade barrier will also be quickly removed to reduce the trade efficiency and also to reduce the trade cost. And as much as the cost is reduced, the more benefit will be given to the African farmers. And this duty channel is a very friendly connection between China and Africa. China is wholeheartedly willing to support the African economy because everybody knows that African people, they have more people and less, export, and they are strengthened by lots of, nature, technological, and other, capital limitations. So by giving more favorable conditions to the African countries, would give the great opportunity for those producers to produce at lower cost, to have a bigger profit margin, so that they will have more ability to invest into the agricultural system to produce more highly value-added product for the Chinese market.
Mm-hmm. Professor, what's worth mentioning here is that this policy also covers processed, higher value-added products. So instead of just exporting raw materials, African countries could like roasted coffee locally or turn cocoa into finished products, then export to China. So how do you view this shift, and to what extent could it help Africa move up the value chain?
Yes, processing agricultural product is a single most important production link from the farm gate to the final consumers. In this case, the final consumer could be considered as the Chinese domestic market. But from the farm gate to the export border, there is a transportation and processing process. The more that the local people, the local producers are able to process the raw materials, then the more value added would add to the local market in Africa. This is very important for the development of the African economies. My experience in the past, as I working for the World Bank and many other organizations, is that in Africa, the climate conditions and also the production efficiency of the farm gate is relatively low. The second stage of agricultural produce, the processing industry, is rather underdeveloped and it requires lots of technological assistance and also capital investment to set up the processing industries. Raw material could be processed to add lots of value. But before the local people could do that, I think the market should be open wider, not only for the raw materials, but also for the investment and technological assistance to the processing industries, which is needed for the African country to uplift their living standard and their income standard. I think China is more than willing to assist the African country to get into the process so that more value added will be added to the local flavor.
Mm-hmm. Professor, one last question. At a time when protectionism is on the rise and global tensions are spilling over, China is opening its market further to Africa. What kind of signal does this send globally, especially compared with countries that are actually putting up tariff barriers? What does it mean for global trade?
I think we have different value of human development. The Chinese value is the so-called socialist modernization, and the socialist modernization is not only for a few group of people. It's actually for all the people, not only in China but also in the rest of the world. This is the so-called inclusiveness and also supportive and openness approach for China to promote common prosperity. In Chinese economy issue is this. If China gets richer, China is able to help the others. And when the others are getting more prosperous, then they have more opportunity to produce more high-quality product for the Chinese market. China regarded as a mutual benefit. China is willing to have this mutual benefit. Some other countries, they consider that they can only the richest country in the world and every country is poor to work for them. And this is why the issue is different. The people who are highly unilateralist and also protectionist, they just look for the domestic market. And even within the domestic market, it's just for the very low percentage of the rich people. The poor people, even within their country, they are living in poverty, in low income and difficult conditions. So I think these kinds of development issues reflect China's attitude toward Africa, China's attitude toward the rest of the world, that we want to have an inclusive world that everybody could prosper, so that the divided world could become less divided. If we have prosperity, we should have to have the prosperity for all the people, not only just for one nation, a few nations, but all for the nations. For one people, but for all the people. And I think this kinds of China's attitude is to demonstrate that China could do it and hope that other people could follow. Unfortunately, not many other people have followed China this way. But China has become an emerging, most powerful developing countries, the largest trading nations. What China do would have a very big impactful effect on the global economic development and also the geopolitical system.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Professor, for those valuable insights. That was Dr. Yao Shujie, Changhong Professor of Economics at Chongqing University. Moving on to diplomatic relations, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says China and Australia should stand on the right side of the history, support multilateralism, uphold global free trade system, ensure stable supply chains, and play a constructive role in resolving global hotspots while promoting a fairer global governance system. Speaking at the 8th Bilateral Diplomatic and Strategic Dialogue with his Australian counterpart Penny Wong in Beijing, Wang Yi stressed that China's cooperation with Pacific Island countries is not aimed at any third party and urged Australia to view it objectively. He also detailed China's stance on the Taiwan question. For her part, Penny Wong reaffirmed Australia's adherence to the One China policy, opposition to Taiwan independence, and hope for a peaceful resolution of the Taiwan question. For this and more, let's have Professor Chen Hong, Director of Australian Studies Center at East China Normal University. Professor, first of all, how do you rate this visit? Why now? And what's Australia really hoping to achieve during this visit?
Well, I would say the purpose of Penny Wong's visit is quite obvious. It is to consolidate the hard-won stabilization of China-Australia relations and to prevent external turbulence from pulling the relations, back to confrontation. This visit and also the eighth China-Australia bilateral strategic dialogue came at a moment when the international situation is highly unsettled, especially after the escalation of the US-Iran conflict and the disruption of energy flows. China's foreign ministry described the visit as an opportunity to implement the two countries' leaders' consensus, enhance political mutual trust, deepen mutually beneficial cooperation, and promote steady, sound, and sustainable relations. So their language is important because it shows Beijing wants the relationship to move from crisis management to institutionalized dialogue and practical cooperation. So from the Australian side, Penny Wong's own remarks also stressed a stable and constructive relationship while acknowledging both cooperation and differences. So the timing is not accidental. This is both a diplomatic visit and also a stress test for whether Australia and China can manage differences while expanding common interests.
Professor, recently, after tensions in the Middle East, Australia's Prime Minister Albanese reached out to China, expressing a willingness to deepen cooperation in areas such as clean energy, new energy vehicles, energy storage, and carbon reduction. So how do you see this cooperation developing going forward after this visit?
Yeah, I think the prospects are substantial because the two economies are highly complementary. Australia has resources, minerals, land, renewable energy potential, and a strong need for industrial upgrading. China has manufacturing capacity, green energy, electric vehicle supply chains, batteries, solar and wind equipment, and a massive market. So Premier Li Qiang's recent phone call with Prime Minister Albanese specifically mentioned cooperation in clean energy, electric vehicles, energy storage, and carbon reduction, and also called for accelerating the review and upgrade discussions of the bilateral free trade agreements. So in the context of the Middle East crisis and energy insecurity, this cooperation is not just about trade, this is about resilience. Australia has to learn that relying too heavily on distant security partners does not solve immediate energy vulnerabilities, while cooperation with China can deliver practical stabilization effects in fuel supply chains and green transition. So the key question is whether Canberra can resist politicizing economic cooperation. So if Australia treats Chinese green technology as an opportunity rather than a security threat, then the two countries can be expected to build a new growth pillar beyond iron ore, coal, LNG, energy, education, and tourism, etc.
Professor, delve into that. Right before the visit, Australia signed a $7 billion warship deal with Japan. Japan's the first major arms export of this kind. So how does China view the timing of this move ahead of the dialogue? Does it undermine the sincerity of both sides in, reaffirming strategic mutual trust, given, Japanese militarism history in the Second World War and increasing signs of renewed military provocation recently?
Yeah. The Australia-Japan warship deal is indeed troubling in both its symbolism and timing. Public reports say Australia and Japan signed contracts of a landmark 10 billion Australian dollars, or roughly, as you said, 7 billion US dollars warship deal, described as Tokyo's most consequential military sale since the end of its military export ban. So even if the exact date is reported differently in some media discussions, the political point remains. That is, just before a major strategic dialogue with China, Australia was also, deepening military-industrial cooperation with Japan in a way widely interpreted through the lens of US-led Indo-Pacific containment, the so-called Indo-Pacific containment. This inevitably creates doubts about Australia's strategic sincerity if one hand reaches out to China for dialogue, energy security, and trade, while the other hand strengthens a military network that clearly carries China-targeted implications. Then the message becomes mixed. So China does not oppose normal defense cooperation between countries, but it has every reason to oppose the formation of exclusive military blocs and also the revival of Japanese military ambitions and any attempt to use the regional security arrangements to pressure China.
Professor, to delve into this, Australia says it advocates multilateralism with China, but the Australia-Japan Defense Agreement has been interpreted by some analysts as aligning with the U.S. so-called Indo-Pacific strategy and targeting China. So in your view, can Australia sustain this dual-track approach, gain with the U.S. and Japan for security while depending on China economically?
I do not think Australia can indefinitely sustain this dual-track approach without paying a strategic cost. For a period of time, Canberra has tried to separate politics and economics. That is to say, relying on the United States and Japan for security while relying on China for trade, exports, students, resources, tourism, energy flows, and regional economic stability. This may appear convenient, but it is internally contradictory. China-Australia economic cooperation depends on trust, predictability, mutual respect. If Australia continues to define China as an economic partner while at the same time also a security threat, the foundation of cooperation becomes fragile. So the danger is that security anxiety will spill over into investment screening, technologies restrictions, public opinion, media narratives, and industrial policy. So once that happens, every area of strong complementarity, such as green energy, batteries, critical minerals, education even, and also agriculture, these areas could be distorted by, geopolitical motives. The long-term challenge for Australia is to decide whether it wants to be an independent middle power in Asia or merely a southern anchor of the United States alliance strategy.
Professor, one last question briefly, because both the Australian Prime Minister and Foreign Minister reaffirmed Australia's long-standing adherence to the One China policy. How do you interpret Australia's position and the signal it sends?
Australia's reaffirmation of the One China policy and its statement that it does not support Taiwan independence send a positive and necessary signal. The Taiwan question is at the very core of China's core interests, and it is also the most sensitive political foundation in China's relations with countries such as Australia. When Penny Wong said Australia adheres to the One China policy, opposes Taiwan independence, and hopes for peaceful resolution, this helped clarify that Australia should not allow itself to be dragged by external forces to using the Taiwan question as a strategic tool against China. Of course, words must be matched by actions. So if Australia truly respects the One China principle, it should avoid sending wrong signals to separate forces, and also should be cautious about military or political moves that increase tension across the Taiwan Strait. Stability in the strait is served not by foreign interference, but by respecting China's sovereignty and also the political commitment Australia itself has made.
Indeed. Thanks, Professor, for those insightful analysis. That was Professor Chen Hong, Director of Australian Studies Center at East China Normal University. This is World Today. We'll be back after a short break. You've been listening to Road Today with Mika Anna in Beijing. Turning to Russia and the United States, President Vladimir Putin says Russia is ready to declare a truce for the Victory Day period in Ukraine. He made the remarks during a phone conversation with President Donald Trump. Putin strongly condemned the recent assassination attempt on Trump. He called Trump's decision to extend the Iran ceasefire the right move. He also warned against any ground operation in Iran. So for more on this, my colleague Gao Yingshi earlier spoke with Sultan Hali, a retired Air Force officer and author in Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. Hali, for joining us. According to the Kremlin, this 90-minute call between Putin and Trump was initiated by the Russian side. So what does Putin's decision to pick up the phone at this particular moment tell us?
The timing is different things are happening. Mr. Trump has put himself in a bind. The bind is, first of all, there is a 60-day window under the War Powers Resolution, which has become a critical pivot point for Trump. And once May 1st arrives, this will dictate that Trump cannot legally continue hostilities against Iran without explicit authorization from the Congress. And the deadline forces him into a set of constrained options. Now, he could formally request approval from Congress to continue military operations or take some other actions which will not be popular or which will not be what he calls himself democratic. Now, you see, Trump and Putin, they both have a kind of an understanding with each other, a mutual respect. So, and then Putin was recently visited by Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, and this diplomatic shuttle between Islamabad, Muscat, and St. Petersburg by Abbas Araghchi gave Putin some ammunition, I would say, or maybe talking points to bail Mr. Trump out and probably suggest some things for peace. Now, as far as the timing and intent are concerned, which you have just asked me, first of all, you see, Putin's decision to pick up the phone reflects Moscow's desire to shape the narrative at a critical juncture. Now, with the Iranian ceasefire extended and Ukraine tensions simmering, Russia wanted to ensure its voice was heard directly in Washington. And perhaps Putin also wanted to share with Trump the outcome, as I mentioned earlier, of his talks. But the important thing is that the clear-cut signal that came out, it shows Putin positioning himself as a proactive player, not a reactive one, seeking to influence the outcomes rather than wait for them to happen.
Trump revealed after the call that Putin offered to take Iran's enriched uranium to Russia. So what does this offer tell us about the real state of Iran's nuclear program after the US and Israeli strikes? And what is Russia hoping to get out of it?
These are two very important considerations. First of all, let's talk about the state of Iran's program. Things are a little blurred, a little hazy, but the fact that Abbas Araghchi went to Putin and talked to him, most probably on the nuclear issue, indicates that Putin offered to take Iran's enriched uranium, and it suggests that Iran's nuclear infrastructure has been severely disrupted by the US and Israeli strikes. And Tehran perhaps may not be in a position to safeguard or continue enrichment at the previous levels. But you see, at this moment, Tehran trusts Moscow and obviously not Washington, D.C., which has been saying that give me the enriched uranium. So that is one aspect. Then what are the Russian motives, which you have asked me? Possibly, Moscow gains leverage on two fronts. First, by presenting himself as a responsible custodian of nuclear material, and second, by inserting Moscow as an indispensable broker in the Iran file. Now, this enhances Russia's bargaining power, both with Washington and Tehran.
During the call, Putin welcomed Trump's decision to extend the Iran ceasefire. So what signal did Putin send to Trump on the Iran issue? And what role is Russia playing in the U.S. war against Iran?
I personally think it was a supportive gesture, because by welcoming Trump's decision to extend the ceasefire, Putin has signaled alignment with Washington on de-escalation, at least at a tactical level. But the underlying role emerges that Russia is not directly fighting the US war against Iran, as Trump has sometimes been claiming so. But Russia is maneuvering to be seen as a stabilizer. And this allows Moscow to maintain ties with Tehran while also keeping its channels open with Washington.
During the phone call, both leaders also talked about the Ukraine issue. So Putin proposed a temporary ceasefire during the Victory Day celebrations, and Trump expressed his support. How much substantive meaning does this proposal really carry? And do you think Ukraine will accept it?
It's interesting because you see, whatever Putin has suggested, it has a symbolic value. And his suggestion of a temporary ceasefire during the May 9th celebrations of the Victory Day, it carries more symbolic value than substantive weight. It appeals to historical memory, but it does not address the core battlefield issues. So as far as Ukraine's acceptance is concerned, I personally think Kyiv is unlikely to embrace it wholeheartedly, seeing it only as a tactical pause rather than a genuine step towards peace.
Trump has rapidly claimed that a deal to end the Ukraine war is close based on what come out of this phone call. What are the core disagreements here? And are the two sides really anywhere near a ceasefire?
My 2 cents worth is that the phone call revealed that while both sides are talking about ceasefire, the sticking points remain. What are they? Territorial control, security guarantees, and political recognition. But you see, we need a reality check. Despite Trump's optimism, the two sides are not near a comprehensive ceasefire, and this is my opinion. But what exists are tactical pauses and symbolic gestures, which are not at all anywhere close to a framework for lasting peace. So, my personal, take from all this is that by tying Iran's nuclear file to Ukraine's Victory Day ceasefire, Moscow is signaling that it cannot be ignored in either theater. I personally think, that there is what you call absence of trust. Moscow is very clear in its thinking that this war was thrust upon Russia. And it was, although the West has been claiming that Russia attacked Ukraine, but the situation was created by the West, especially led by the US. And therefore, although they have bled Russia quite a bit, it's now been 4 years, but the fact is that Moscow is still standing strong. Moscow may not have, overrun Ukraine, which probably was never its intention. Its intention was to teach Ukraine a lesson and force it to give up its dreams of joining the NATO. But now that even NATO is on its death throes because of Mr. Trump's shenanigans, so my personal reading is that a permanent ceasefire will only come about if the West, led by the US, is willing to accept the ground realities. And obviously, Moscow will also be willing because it must also be suffering from battle fatigue. And frankly speaking, it has also taken a lot of physical and material losses as well as financial losses. But at the end of the day, the world wants peace. Moscow also wants peace, but Europe and America, now that they are facing another reality, and that of the Iranian war, which is forcing them to take steps which is, troubling them too much in the financial field. So therefore, there is a possibility that coveted ceasefire may be around the corner, but I don't see it happening in the near future unless mutual trust is built.
That was Sultan Hali, a retired Air Force officer and author in Pakistan, speaking with my colleague Gao Yingxu. Now shifting to innovation and logistics, China has launched its first drone-powered cross-sea delivery route, linking the eastern coastal city of Dalian and Qingdao. The new service is expected to sharply cut transport times for high-value and time-sensitive goods. It covers the 340-kilometer journey in around 2 hours, far faster than the 5 to 10 hours typically needed by road and rail. The service relies on a large fixed-wing drone with a maximum takeoff weight of more than 5 tons. Officials say the launch marks a major step forward in applying drone technology and advancing China's low-altitude economy. So for more on this, let's bring in Andy Mok, professor at Beijing Foreign Studies University. Thanks for joining us, Professor.
Glad to be with you.
Andy, Dalian and Qingdao are only about 160 kilometers apart, but by land it takes over 1,300 kilometers and more than 10 hours. Now, drones can do it in about 2 hours. How big of a game changer is this? Could we be looking at a new air corridor across the Bohai Sea?
Well, I think we absolutely, this is in fact a new air corridor, and that is how it's being described by the Chinese government. And to give you just an example of how significant this can be in terms of fostering trade, and I think just, a more vibrant economy. We look through, hundreds, thousands of years of history. The people or the cities that were close to a river thrived because moving goods by water was far, far cheaper and easier than moving it by land. So just as similarly we're seeing here, if you can move things by air, by drone, instead of driving or even a ferry, I think that will have a very profound impact on that region. But I think there's a bigger picture here as well. So this Bohai route is the first operational proof that China's low-altitude economy really is here. And, this is a milestone kicking this off. And it's also a template which Beijing can replicate in other parts of China, say the Greater Bay Area or going from Guangdong to Hainan province, etc. But even more significantly, it can also export this template to maritime Southeast Asia. So think of all the thousands of islands in Indonesia, many, many islands in the Philippines that have historically suffered from this exact same problem. And I think what this will mean, and we will see, I think probably sooner than I think many might expect, is that, the countries that adopt this model first will reshape their logistics geography in very, very profound ways.
Compared with traditional air cargo, what unique advantages does drone logistics offer, and which industries, in your opinion, will benefit first?
Sure. Well, I think a couple things here that make drones better than manned aircraft. So one, of course, is you don't need pilots. And it's not only that pilots are expensive, but also there's a global shortage, and it takes quite a while to train and have pilots certified. So I think this is one issue, and of course this is a cost factor as well. Another very interesting thing about the HY100 is that it only requires something like I think like 150 meters of runway, versus much longer runways that manned planes would require. So again, I think this makes it much easier and cheaper to set up. And then, of course, I think this shows up in the cost per ton transport fee. And again, when it comes to many kinds of trade, cost matters a lot. That being said, I do think that right now, it's best suited for high value goods, perishables, so pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, fresh seafood, etc., where sometimes hours do make a difference.
Andy, we see China's low-altitude economy has gone from a new growth engine in 2024 work report to a strategic emerging industry in 2025, and now a pillar industry in 2026. So in just 3 years, what role does the opening of this route play in turning the low-altitude economy from concept into reality?
Sure. Well, I think you're right, that we are seeing this policy elevation, now into the 15th five-year plan. But more importantly, I think in parallel, we are seeing, in the real world, this actually happening. And I think something else that's worth pointing out is that flying over sea is harder than flying over land. One, seawater or salt corrodes airframes, engines, avionics. The wind is more powerful and less predictable over the sea than over land because it doesn't have the friction maybe to slow it down. There's no emergency landing option. So if you have a problem with the plane or the drone, you'd have to put it down in the water. That could mean total loss. And here's the thing. The HY-100 is engineered for all of this. And again, I think this shows that the Chinese approach is to elevate policy as the policy matures and can be diffused, but at the same time, making sure that the engineering and the manufacturing and the manpower is there as well to support the policy and to turn it into real world impact. And just by the way, this is exactly what I cover in my book, The Innovation Machine, how China creates and adopts technology through governance. And I think this is a perfect example of how China can go from an idea, we need better infrastructure to bring cities or areas that are separated by bodies of water together, create the institutions to implement this. In this case, I think a special group at the NDRC, and then have the instruments. So again, the 5-year plan, the standards, et cetera. So the airspace, you want to keep it, I think, under 300 meters so it doesn't get in the way of commercial aircraft. And then that leads to the infrastructure, of course, and then finally the impact. And again, I think we're seeing the impact in a very, very short period of time.
When we talk about this low altitude economy, China has proposed a 3-step approach to developing this sector, prioritizing cargo before passenger transport, segregation before integration, and suburban before urban operations. So based on this framework, realistically, how far are we from seeing people actually flying on this low altitude routes?
Sure. Well, I think this really depends what we mean. So, we already have people flying, tourists, on eVTOL flights. But if you're thinking, there was a very famous cartoon series, I think back in the 1970s in the United States called The Jetsons, where you could hop in your sort of like an airplane and fly wherever you want. So, except here it'd be with drones. That we have to see. I mean, there's a lot that has to be covered here. And I think the Chinese approach is very measured. As you mentioned, cargo before passenger, segregated airspace before integrated, suburban before urban. Because you do have to take this a step at a time. And I think while, the technology is largely understood, I think, the policy work that needs to be done is more an extension versus something new. That still, I think there will be hiccups or unanticipated issues. So, that moving in a more steady, incremental way makes a lot of sense. So, if we're thinking about mass availability of drones to let people fly from point A to point B, I don't know, maybe late 2030s, perhaps.
And one last question. Globally speaking, where does China stand in large-scale drone logistics, especially compared to the United States and Europe?
Well, I think, the most important thing is China produces by far the most commercial drones. And I think second, again, because China can bring this entire i5 model stack to go idea to institutions, to instruments, to infrastructure, to impact. So this means aircraft operator licensing, airspace rules, the actual infrastructure, including, the manufacturing maintenance of these drones, the standards that are required. That China's, I think, really the only country that can deliver the whole stack. The U.S., of course, can deliver certain kinds of technology, say for the last mile delivery. But if you're a country or even a region looking to take advantage of this, you can't just have a piece of technology or a piece of hardware. You really do have to have the whole stack. And I think this is something that only China can offer. And this is going to matter a lot for maritime Southeast Asia and perhaps other parts of the world.
Thanks, Andy, for those insightful analysis. That was Andy Mok, professor at Beijing Foreign Studies University and author of China's Innovation Mission. Finally, on education and workforce development, an increasing number of Chinese college graduates are turning to technical schools to boost their job prospects as competition in the labor market intensifies. In response, local governments are expanding vocational training programs. In the capital city, Beijing, authorities plan to launch 6 full-time technician classes and more than 20 short-term courses this year. The programs combine classroom study with enterprise internships, focusing on practical fields such as smart manufacturing and new energy vehicles. For more, my colleague Lian Qingxuan spoke with Shi Xuezhu, assistant professor at the School of Insurance, University of International Business and Economics.
So, Professor Xu, to start with, why are more college students choosing technical schools, and what advantages do skills-based paths offer in terms of pay, job stability, and career growth?
For your first question, the first reason, of course, is their probability of getting employed is going to be higher after they're getting educated again in the technical schools. And also the second reason is that because the wage of this new typed blue collar wage is also getting higher, given the impact of AI and also the industry upgrading. And also this one is now becoming more attractive to the younger generation under the impact of the AI on the knowledge-based labor market. And for the second one, I think, as I said before, the new typed blue collar wage is relatively higher comparing to the traditional manufacturing sector. Also, the pay is stronger is because the skills are scarce. So as mentioned in one of the reports in the newspaper, there are 20 million skilled worker shortage in the high-end manufacturing industry. So I think that's why the pay, in terms of pay, is much higher compared to the traditional manufacturing field. And the second, the job stability may be better is because the training is very tied to the concrete occupation itself. And the third reason is that in terms of the growth, career growth, it will be also more visible because your training is very tied to your current occupation. So the skills are very cumulative and certifiable as well. So a skill-based route actually allows workers to move from the entry-level technician role to a higher-level technical supervisor position as they accumulate more experience and also more credentials.
And some say that university programs are not keeping up with China's market needs. Do you agree with this? If so, what's falling behind and how should they be improved?
I actually personally, I don't agree very much with this statement. I think maybe some of the program are not keeping up with the market need, but I think for most of the top universities, like the double first class initiative universities, I think we're trying very hard to accommodate the market change. I think this noon, we just had an internal discussion about how we should adapt our curriculum to the labor market. Also, I don't think that the university education is only about fitting the labor market demand. I think we also have the responsibility to educate students' research ability and also their social values. But of course, for some universities that has relatively lower ranks in the education system, I think this problem is actually more feasible for them. But I think for these universities, they can actually improve their ties with the industry, like they can hire professors and teachers that is working very closely with the manufacturing industry and also with the labor market. I think that's what those universities can have to improve.
And the programs focus on areas like smart manufacturing, new energy vehicles, integrated circuits, industrial arts, etc. So what does this reflect about the changing demands of China's job markets?
Yes, actually, it affects a lot since we have a upgrading in terms of the industry. So I think this reflects the whole demand of the job market is actually changing based on this industry upgrading. And also, again, the demand of this new blue-collar jobs for the high-end industry and also the high-tech manufacturing industry is also rising. And also it also reflects actually a shift in the job market from the usual credential-based hiring or knowledge-based hiring towards a skill or task-based hiring. So previously, we're more likely to focus only on students' undergrad degree, right? If you are graduated from very good universities, then you have better advantage in the labor market, given the economics is growing and our industry is based on the traditional models in terms of labor market hiring. But now in sectors particularly linked to the high-end manufacturing and also high-tech company is actually these companies are focusing more on the skill-based and also task-based demand for the technological and also the industrial upgrading.
Yeah. Now let's take a broader view. How does this trend fit into China's efforts to stabilize employment and manage the unemployment rate? Well, recently China added 38 new undergraduate majors, including fields like embodied AI. So what do these signals suggest about how the education system is aligning with labor market demand?
Yeah, of course, I think as we discussed before, this trend would actually help a lot in terms of a stabilize of the employment, right? And that's what this policy is about. And in terms for your second question, I think the new majors is a signal that is indicating that our education system is more aligned with the labor market demand. And it also suggests the education system is trying to become more industry-oriented, more flexible, skill-oriented in both academic knowledge and also applied technical capability that are valued, rather than simply remain in our traditional academic curriculum.
Many countries, especially Germany, have well-established vocational education systems. So what lessons can China learn from their experience?
I think that's a very good question because they actually have a very good, as you said, a well-established vocational education system. I think first is to change the whole social attitude, right? Because now we still think if you go to the vocational schools, you are discriminated in the labor market, right? And also your parents are not very happy about this and people probably will look down. And also the wage is not that high. But however, if studying from Germany, I think their blue-collar workers' wage is pretty high. So as long as the wage increases, they will have more respect in the societies, and also it will lead to this long-term stability of having good skilled workers graduated from the vocational school. And also the second thing that we can learn from Germany is we can actually strengthen the integration between the school and the firm, because I think in the university now, students are looking for interns and other things similar to internship, but it's on the students their own to find those internships. And I think in terms of the integration of the school and firms, our universities and also the vocational schools can work together with the firms, and then the firms will provide opportunities for internship. And then after the graduation, they can directly be employed in this firm. And also the curriculum can be tailor-made to these certain firms. And also the third aspect would be the vocational education would offer a upward mobility, but not a dead end. Actually, a very strong vocational system would actually allow workers to enter employment earlier, to accumulate experience, but also if they want to get higher education afterwards, they can do that as well. And also the final thing is that China should adapt the model to our own industry organization, right? Because Germany, the full things is based on the traditional manufacturing field, like car industry, right? But now since China, we also have the new energy cars, right? EV cars, and also we also have other high-end AI-related, technology-related manufacturing firm. So our vocational school should train their students more towards the field that we need, rather than completely copying what German is having now.
That was Shixue Zhu from University of International Business and Economics talking to Lian Qingxuan. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm Anna in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.